talk, yeah, with CoCo O'Neal. Real purpose, real talk, yeah. It's time to get real. A real purpose, real talk, yeah, with CoCo O'Neal. Real purpose, real talk, yeah. It's time to get real. Real purpose, real talk, yeah. Alive with CoCo O'Neal.
Welcome to Real Purpose, Real Talk with CoCo O'Neal. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so excited for today because this is my first live YouTube video in many, many years. I decided to bring back Real Purpose, Real Talk with myself to get into some real, transparent conversations and discussions. So I'm CoCo O'Neal, CoCo O'Neal. I'm a mental health professional, Christian minister, and faith-based emotional resilience life coach. This channel is a space for honest conversation about healing, emotional wellness, faith, and transformation. Today, I'm beginning a chapter-by-chapter reflection of my book, No More Makeup, Taking Off the Mask to Uncover Healing. We're going to start with chapter one of my book, which is called Slow Hope. This chapter is about my childhood. I grew up in an abusive household. My father struggled with addiction. My mother endured physical and emotional abuse. Stability, safety, and consistency were not a part of my early life. My sister left home at 13. My father was rarely present. And as a child, I was left feeling lost, confused, and abandoned. Slow hope is the kind of hope that forms in environments like that, right? Not because life is good, but because survival requires something to hold on to. Before I read the chapter, I want you to know that this conversation will not include graphic details. The purpose is understanding, not re-experiencing. So again, I just want to welcome you to my channel, Real Purpose, Real Talk with CoCo O'Neal, where we talk about transparent issues, where we talk about faith, where we talk about healing, where we talk about resilience, right? Real conversation. So I'm going to transition into reading. Share, like, and subscribe while you're a part of this YouTube channel. This is the first day, so I hope that you all come back as we get into things, because I am going to be sharing chapter by chapter over the next few weeks. And so I hope that what I'm sharing with you allows you to do some reflection. I hope that it allows you to be encouraged and to strengthen and build up your resilience and your faith. So this chapter, Slow Hope, was written from a place of healing. Hear me. It was written from a place of healing, not chaos. I had already begun my healing journey and ministry. I wrote this book in 2013. So we're taking a look back in order to go forward as well. Writing this book allowed me to name what I survived and honor the resilience God had already formed in me. Okay, so we're going to get into it a little bit by reading a few pages from chapter 1. And the name of the book is No More Makeup, Taking Off the Mask to Uncover Healing by CoCo O'Neal. You can find it on Amazon. But we're going to get into the first chapter of the book. So Slow Hope, again, talks about that resilience. It talks about the hope that you have, even though that hope is slow, even though that hope is not out loud, but it's something as a child, as I was going through those traumatic experiences, that I was able to still have some form of hope while going through that. These passages that I'm going to read, they describe confusion, they describe abandonment, and the emotional atmosphere that I was in. It was an environment of growing up feeling unsafe. That's why there was this slow hope. Like there was a hope, but then it was slowly building, right? It wasn't really present out loud because of what I was going through. So I'm going to read a couple pages from Slow Hope. I try hard to remember laughter in my house growing up. I can't seem to remember much of it in the early years. Of course, there were moments when we smiled and laughed. However, I can't say it lasted long. There were always serious things happening. Laughter is one of those things that I felt I was neglected of as a child. So much was going on. Who had time to laugh? Not for long anyway. It's funny how when you think over your childhood, the smallest things seem to matter most. I guess for me, laughter is one of those things I wish I had more of. To this very day, I try to find ways to laugh because laughter hasn't been an active part of my life. I recently asked God to give me more laughter. It may seem simple, but I want to smile more from the inside out. My home was a broken one. My father was broken, and so was my mother. I believe everyone around me was broken in some way or another. I grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood in the early 80s. You know, the kind that seems fabulous until you get a little bit older and start to wonder, when did things get so bad and how can you leave it behind? Hello? Yes, things were pretty bad. But as a child, all you see is having fun, playing in the dirt with your friends. You don't consider the dope sacks that you find while playing marbles in the dirt. It's just what it is. Death was a common thing around my way: drugs, police, shootouts, and fighting. I really never saw it as something that wasn't who I was. I grew up around this and thought this was the way of life. There were the times when we cried, and there were the times when we had fun. At least to us, it was fun. It was our way of releasing the stresses of the ghetto. Our neighborhood stood united with each other. Some mothers took care of their children and partied all night after the kids were fed and safe. My mom. Others neglected their children while using drugs. Fathers were missing or physically there but inattentive. Brothers sold drugs to take care of themselves and their mothers. We had block parties, played in the water hydrants on a hot day, bought candy from the store bus, and visited the freeze lady every time we could get a quarter. Who remembers the freeze lady? Did you have a freeze lady in your neighborhood? There never had to be a reason for a party. People had yard parties, drinking with their friends every day. There were some really talented kids born out of the ghetto too. They entertained us all, and it was always sad when that talented young man or woman would quit school to sell drugs, only to end up dead at 17. I never saw any of this as not being a part of me because that's all I knew. I never dreamt of being rich or famous when I was a kid. I never dreamt of leaving the ghetto when I was a kid. All of my dreams were about love, living past 21, and wondering if my father would ever get off crack. I lost plenty of friends to drug-related violence, and I saw plenty of my friends get pregnant before 16. I never knew that I never wanted either to happen to me. I knew that I wanted neither to happen to me. But this was a part of life, nothing out of norm to me. I never looked down at anyone from around my way. We all had a story, and everybody had a reason for why they did what they did. I don't uphold wrong, but for years, I didn't know the difference either. Or possibly, but you just don't see how it could ever be better. When I was really younger, I had one dream. I wanted to be a successful writer, perhaps even a lawyer. Those dreams got lost in the midst of becoming older and putting on my big girl glasses. Things just seemed so foggy. Over the years, my experiences would shape the way that I learned to adapt, adopt, and survive. I can't remember being high on hope for the future. I had no clue what the future would be, or even if I had one. I just did not envision a lot happening outside of what I saw in front of me. I wanted to dream, and every time I attempted to, something would make me lose my motivation. Growing up, my family life was difficult, horrific to be frank. Everyone in my household was literally on eggshells. I guess we always wonder what would happen next. Growing up in the projects had its realities, but that was the streets. When those things come into your home, it really becomes life changing. I guess my home became a product of its environment, so to speak. The epidemic of the crack in the 80s would have a dramatic effect on my family. Like many homes in urban neighborhoods during the rise of crack, the dynamic of family would change. My home became a scary and violent place. The things I saw growing up were threatening to a young child's emotional stability and future. I saw blood running from my mom's nose and big black eyes. I saw my father change from a daddy to a nightmare. I heard screams and police sirens. I witnessed guns being drawn on my father, and I watched my father kick in doors and threaten my mother. As a child, I witnessed my father decline over the years. I have watched it drift further apart as the hurt of the past still lingers around in the hearts and minds of my loved ones. My father was someone who I adored, and I think it was a natural adoration that a girl has for her father. He could do no wrong in my eyes. I believe this is true because I saw him with my heart instead of my eyes. However, the devastating reality of who my father had become was so overwhelming for me to understand. My father was abusive to my mother, and that abuse had its effects on my family. I remember as a child the look on my mother's face after my father would hurt her. Whether the hurt was physical or emotional, the look on my mom's face was always the same. The look was hurt, fear, and anger. In the beginning, hurt and fear seemed more present than anger. My mother was the kind of mother that walked us to school every day, and she would be at the top of the stairs of the school waiting when the school bell rang. When I got home from school, dinner was already finished and the house was spotless and smelled of pine sol. I remember lying in her bed during a thunderstorm and she would read the Bible to us. The lights would go out and she would light candles and read. I would be so afraid listening to the thunder and lightning. Eventually, we would start to sing songs and just lay there as the storm played in the background. The times of those storms remind me of what my mother went through. She was going through this storm in her life, but it was God who comforted her and kept her safe, just as she held us during the storm. It's funny when you get older, you can see how God was always there holding you, keeping you from being destroyed. Then it goes on, no weapon formed against us shall prosper. As a child, my mother was the best. I just could not understand why my father would hurt someone like her. The pain that he inflicted was physical and emotional with my mom, but the emotional abuse my siblings and I did suffer hard. No child wants someone they love hurt and humiliated, neither the less by someone else that they love. I could not understand what was happening in my life, but I knew that there definitely was a change. I recall that my father would torment my mom with harassing phone calls, threatening to kill her, him and her. One day we came home and we walked into our apartment. We knew that my father had been there. He had cut up my mother's new living room suit and stolen the entertainment system. My mother was devastated. She had just purchased these things on a store credit account, and he chose to do that to humiliate her. I remember the look in her eyes of anguish and exhaustion. I was so young, but I understood that my father was a monster. The man I adored had become the boogeyman. I remember hearing a story I'm not going to share that part. I was going to share this part, but I don't want to get too deep into um, the severity of some of the issues. But I wanted to share this with you, and I'm going to share another part of it. It says, I missed school from time to time. We ran away to escape his torment. Things were so terrible that we had a code with our downstairs neighbor. If we beat on the back bedroom floor, that meant call the police. I recall one time we were literally screaming out of the windows for help as my father was trying to break down the door. I was so scared and it just didn't make sense. I didn't understand why he was so mean and hurting my mom. It felt like a horror movie and the boogeyman would not go away. Can you imagine having to run in the back bedroom and beat on the floor or the walls, hoping that your neighbor was home so that they could call the police, hoping that he wouldn't get into the house and hurt your mom? It was terrifying. It was terrifying. So that's a little bit of my story from Slow Hope. You can imagine why hope was so slow, right? Why I didn't really have hope or didn't understand hope or knew how to hope, but I was hanging on. I was in survival mode as a child. In this chapter, I also say that turmoil can destroy families, especially if there's not a solid foundation that the family is standing on. So today I love regardless of the past, and I do on purpose. I have attempted on many occasions to forgive. I have forgiven. Um, this is a part of my story. As of today in 2026, both of my parents are deceased. My father was murdered in January of 2012, and my mother passed away from Alzheimer's dementia October 2024. So I've lost both of my parents as of day. And the things that I went through as a child really helped me to be the woman that I am today. I believe that all these things have worked together for my good, even though they were hard. I felt abandoned, that emotional or physical security and safety in my home because I grew up in a household of devastation and torment. And so in this chapter, even though, I describe living in an abusive home shaped by addiction and instability, some details I chose to leave out. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background of it. But what I realize now as a mental health professional, I now recognize that what I experienced was childhood trauma, that chronic instability, that emotional abandonment, and the lack of safety, right? And so many of us have experienced some of those things, maybe not the exact same thing, but you understand what it means to experience trauma, childhood trauma. So as a believer, I recognize that God's presence did not begin later. Even though I had that slow hope, like didn't really have hope, or maybe it was there and it was kind of like slowly progressing because I was in survival mode. But God was always there. He was a present help. He was sustaining me even then. I didn't recognize it. I had an issue with God growing up because I didn't understand, like, how could we go through so many of these things? Where was God? What was he doing? I was angry with him. I had a slow hope. And that slow hope wasn't optimism. It was endurance. It was survival. It was that quiet strength of a child who kept going without explanation or protection. I kept going without explanation, understanding, or protection. I was confused. I was upset with God. Not in the beginning, I wasn't really upset with God, but as time went on, as I got older, because all of this started happening when I was like 7, 8 years old. I really remember this significantly in second, third, fourth and fifth grade. So this chapter, Slow Hope, is not about blaming my parents. I love my mom. I love my dad. As we go through the next chapters in the story and I share excerpts and experiences with you, you will understand my relationship with my parents. But again, this started with slow hope because I was a young child, not fully developed, not fully understanding. My life went from bliss to a nightmare when my father got on crack, cocaine. So this is not about blaming my parents. It's about naming reality so that healing could deepen. When I wrote this book, I was at a place of healing, and writing this book allowed my healing to come forth and flourish even more. God told me as I was writing this book, as you help others heal, you will also be healed. And he also told me that my story was for his glory so that I can reach back and help others who are going through the same experiences. So one of the things I want you to reflect on today is, where did you learn to survive before you learned how to feel safe? Where did you learn to survive before you learned how to feel safe? Or how did you learn to survive before you learn how to feel safe? Because sometimes we're surviving even if we're not feeling safe. But where did you learn that? What did that look like for you? You don't have to answer that out loud. Just notice what comes up. Before you felt safe in life, if you experienced childhood trauma, how did you survive that? And did you begin to recognize that God was always there carrying you through, even though you couldn't name it, identify it? But if you look back over your life now, you can see where the hand of God was there, where the presence of God was there, keeping you sane, keeping you alive, right? And you know, even though you experienced those things, all of those things work together for your good now, because I'm quite sure you have a testimony. I'm quite sure you can share with others and lift them up. I'm quite sure you can encourage someone else because of your testimony. So where did you learn to survive before you learned how to feel safe? Where or how? What was your survival mode or mechanism or tool? What was your security blanket during that time? Did you have one? You don't have to answer it out loud. This is just something to help you to reflect. This is kind of like a coaching moment. So before we end, I want to invite you to pause. If this conversation stirred anything in you, take a slow breath, breathe slowly, breathe in, breathe out, feel your feet where they are. Notice something solid in the room around you, and know that you are safe now. Healing doesn't require you to open or reopen wounds. It asks you to tend to them with care, right? So thank you for trusting this space. This is Real Purpose, Real Talk with CoCo O'Neal, and I'll see you next time.